Welcome to the deep dive. So you've sent us some really interesting sources this time. Ideas around luck, karma, accidents, and specifically some spiritual insights from SadhGuru, from a talk he gave.
Yeah, that's right. We've got a transcript from a YouTube video. Looks like an unreleased talk from around 2006.
Okay, and our mission today really is to unpack these interconnected ideas as they're presented there.
Exactly. We want to see how the speaker, SadhGuru, frames them, separate maybe the common understanding from his specific take.
And pull out some key insights, things that might even challenge how we usually think about this stuff.
Absolutely. So Sadhguru, just for context, he's a well-known Indian yogi, a spiritual figure. We're just here to explore the ideas in this material he presented.
Got it. No endorsements, just exploring the source. So where does he start?
Well, it kicks off with a story. It's about a barber and a king. And it's quite a striking way to get into this whole idea of bad luck.
Okay, a story. Let's hear it. What's the setup?
It's set in the Vijayanagar Kingdom, South India, and there's this barber, Redappa.
Redappa. Yeah,
and apparently back then there was this really strong belief seeing a barber first thing in the morning. That was considered really bad luck.
Seriously. Like see his face would mean
Wow.
your whole day's ruined.
Pretty much. People genuinely thought, see the barber, get hit by a car later, that sort of thing. Just misfortune. So Redappa had to be super careful.
Wow. Okay, so what happens with the king?
Well, one morning, the king's out hunting, and who does he see first? Redappa.
Oh boy, I can see where this is going.
Yep. The king is immediately convinced his luck is shot for the day, and his reaction is, well, it's extreme.
How extreme?
He sentences Redappa to death.
Just for being seen, for bringing bad luck.
Just for that. Seems completely disproportionate, right? But that's the setup.
Unbelievable. Okay, so does Redappa just die?
No, this is where another figure comes in, someone called the Nalama.
The Nalama. Okay, what do they do?
The Nalama hears about this, thinks it's outrageous, obviously, and decides to do something quite clever and very public.
Which is?
He creates posters all over town announcing that the king is going to be executed soon.
Whoa. Talk about turning the tables. The king must have been furious.
Absolutely. He sees the posters, summons in the Nalama, demands an explanation. What on earth is this?
And the Nalama's logic. This is the key part, I guess.
It really is. It's brilliant. He basically says to the king, look, if seeing Redappa first thing brought you such terrible luck that you felt you had to sentence him to death, then what kind of unimaginable bad luck must seeing your face have brought to Redappa? He's facing execution because he saw you.
Wow. That's sharp. Holding up a mirror to the king's own logic.
Exactly. It highlights the relativity of bad luck, doesn't it? And the massive difference in consequences.
Yeah, it's less about superstition itself and more about perspectives, how quick we are to label things without thinking through the implications.
Right. What's minor bad luck for one person can be catastrophic for another. It really challenges that easy categorization.
It does. Makes you think. Okay, so from luck and barbers, where does the talk go next?
It shifts to another story, this time involving war strategy and astrology, which sort of challenges relying solely on predetermined outcomes.
Okay, interesting contrast. War and stars. What's the scenario?
So it's Krishnadevaraya's kingdom again. They're facing the Mughal army across the Godavari River.
Right.
And the river's flowing strong, so the Mughals can't easily cross. It's a big tactical advantage for Krishnadevara.
A clear opportunity then.
A clear opportunity. And one of his key advisors, Tali Rama.
Like Tenali Rama, or is this a different Tali Rama?
The source says Tali Rama, possibly the same figure, known for his wit. Anyway, he sees this advantage and says, attack now. We know the crossing points, they don't. The river protects us.
Makes perfect military sense. Straightforward strategy.
You'd think so. But then the Raj Purohit, the royal astrologer, steps in.
The astrologer. Okay, let me guess. He has a different opinion.
Completely different. And the story adds a little detail here. It suggests he might have been bribed by the Mughals.
Oh, really? That adds a layer. So what does the bribed astrologer say?
He delivers this dire astrological prediction. Tells the king the stars are aligned terribly for him. If he attacks now, his life is in grave danger.
Oof. That would give anyone pause, especially a king back then. Your life's on the line according to the stars.
Exactly. The king hesitates, understandably.
But Tali Rama, he probably didn't buy it.
Not at all. He pushes back, and his argument is crucial. He says basically, look, he's a Brahmin, an astrologer. His job is stars, not war strategy.
Right. Different fields of expertise.
He argues that the king is the one responsible for battlefield decisions based on the actual situation, not based on, potentially bribed star charts.
It's about grounding decisions in reality versus predictions.
Precisely. And Talirama apparently takes it a step further, really confronting the Purohit. He questions the astrologer's certainty about his own future, asks him, "You predict you'll live to 84, right? Are you absolutely sure?"
Uh-oh. Where's this going?
Well, the story goes, Talirama then draws his sword and says something like, "You claim to know the king's fate if he attacks. How certain are you about your own next few minutes?"
That's dramatic.
Yeah.
But it makes the point, doesn't it, about the limits of prediction?
A very stark point, yeah, about the danger of letting predictions, especially maybe questionable ones, paralyze necessary action.
So what happened? Did the king listen to Talirama?
He did. He launched the attack, used the river advantage, and won the battle.
So the implication is clear. Practical strategy trumped the possibly compromised prediction.
That seems to be the takeaway. Don't let external forecasts, especially unverified ones, override obvious, tangible advantages. And this connects to the speaker's broader idea about karma.
Okay, how does it connect? He's moving beyond just individual luck or predictions now.
Yeah, he offers a wider definition. He says karma isn't just your own individual actions and their consequences.
What else is it then?
It's also, importantly, about what is happening around you. Your environment, the actions of others. That's also part of the karmic picture that affects you.
Can you give an example of how he explains that?
He uses this analogy because imagine living in a shared house.
Yeah.
You might be super responsible, clean, quiet. But if your housemates are constantly messy, throwing wild parties, being reckless, their actions are going to impact your life.
Absolutely.
Right.
You can't avoid it completely.
Exactly. You don't exist in a bubble. Their karma, in a sense, spills over onto you.
That makes sense. And does he take it further?
He does. He suggests that just condoning it or doing nothing about the chaos around you, that inaction itself becomes a form of karma. You're contributing by allowing it.
So passivity isn't neutral. It has consequences. It's part of the equation.
That's the idea. Which then leads him to a very vivid modern example.
Which is?
Indian traffic.
Ah. Yes, that's certainly an experience.
He describes it as this, seemingly chaotic system where just getting from A to B safely feels almost like a miracle sometimes.
Yeah, I can see that.
And he mentions someone observing this chaos and remarking, "God must be working overtime here."
Yeah, a common sentiment, maybe. But
Yeah.
What's the speaker's point with this example?
His point is quite sharp, actually. He suggests that with such a huge population, the sheer number of people kind of obscures the reality of individual accidents.
How so?
It becomes easier to see accidents as just statistics, like background noise, rather than individual tragedies impacting real lives.
A desensitizing effect of scale.
Perhaps, but more critically, he points out our tendency as humans to come up with fantastic explanations for why bad things happen, especially, really awful things, like someone dying unattended on the street.
Explanations like past life karma, that sort of thing.
Exactly, blaming it on some unknown past deed. And the danger, he says, is that these explanations can become a justification for doing nothing.
Ah, I see. If it's just their karma playing out, why should I get involved? It absolves responsibility.
Precisely. It creates this sort of emotional distance, lets us off the hook from engaging with the immediate, sometimes ugly reality right in front of us.
And that connects back to what he was saying earlier about not seeing the obvious.
Yes, this is a really core point for him. He argues that a major problem is that we often don't see what's right there, the tangible issue, because we're too busy focusing on unseen explanations, like ancient karma.
Like the king blaming the barber for bad luck instead of his own reaction, or potentially listening to astrology over battlefield reality.
Exactly the same pattern, looking for explanations elsewhere instead of dealing with the here and now.
So his call is for what? More direct action. Taking responsibility.
Very much so. He urges us not to contribute to this tragedy of inaction, as he calls it, by hiding behind these kinds of abstract justifications or philosophies.
And he puts that question quite directly, doesn't he? Something about bad luck and karma.
Yeah, he asks, basically, somebody gets killed, is this bad luck? Is it karma? And he points out, if you don't know the karma business, you just say it's bad luck, right?
It highlights how bad luck can be a default, simplistic label when we don't understand or don't want to engage with the complexity.
Exactly, which then flows into his thoughts on, well, the illusion of control and these fancy philosophies.
Okay, what's his take on controlling our lives versus just letting things happen?
He suggests that human life is basically managed only to the extent that we actually take responsibility for managing it. If you don't steer the ship, it's likely to drift.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah.
Active engagement is necessary.
Right. But then he cautions against applying these, grand spiritual or philosophical ideas only partially.
What does he mean by partially?
Like picking and choosing bits that sound nice but not really living the whole system. He argues that applying them superficially can be really misleading.
And that fully embracing some of these deep philosophies might be impractical in daily life.
That seems to be his point. He suggests that trying to live completely by certain complex belief systems might prove almost impossible day to day.
So what happens then, if people only apply them partially?
He suggests they can become a kind of entertainment, something intellectual to talk about, to think about, but not really a practical guide that shapes your actual actions.
Like a hobby rather than a way of life.
Sort of. And his core argument here seems to be about using our intelligence. He believes intelligence is meant to be used actively to perceive reality, not frozen or blocked by preconceived ideas about how life should be or what karma dictates.
So having these ready-made ideas actually stops us from seeing clearly.
That's his assertion. These fixed concepts can act like filters, preventing us from truly observing and understanding a situation for what it is.
Okay, this seems like a significant turn. He's moving from external events and explanations towards our internal state, our perception.
Exactly. Which leads perfectly into his discussion about being versus the constant churn of thinking and emoting, especially when he uses the phrase, be with me.
Right. What does he mean by be with me? It sounds like it could be interpreted in different ways.
He clarifies it's not about constantly thinking about him or generating strong emotions towards him. That's not the point.
Okay. So it's not devotion in the usual sense.
Not in the sense of mental or emotional activity. He uses an analogy, say you want to go see a movie. He mentions doom, specifically in the talk.
Okay, go to see Doom.
Thinking about the movie, feeling excited about it, that might motivate you, right? It makes you want to go. It creates a strong intention, like a rope pulling you towards the cinema.
Sure, it paves the way for the action.
Right. But the thinking and feeling aren't the same as actually being at the cinema watching the film. They're preparatory steps, not the experience itself.
I see the distinction. Thinking about it isn't doing it.
Precisely. And he critiques spiritual processes that kind of get stuck at that preparatory stage, remaining just psychological exercises. All thought, all emotion, but no real investment of life energy, no real activation.
So getting lost in the mental and emotional side of spirituality.
Yes. He suggests that getting too absorbed in your own psychological drama, your thoughts, feelings, interpretations, can actually make you miss reality. Miss what he calls the creator's creation.
The world right here, right now.
Exactly. And this disconnect, he claims, this absorption in our internal world at the expense of external reality, that's the only source of misery and confusion.
That's a strong statement. The only source.
That's what he says in this context. Our minds get so busy with their own stuff, whether it's about a guru, God, worries, plans, even a movie, that we lose touch with just being present.
So be with me is an instruction to just be present. Drop the mental commentary.
That seems to be the core of it. Simply be. Not think about being, not feel about being, just be.
Has he noticed how people react to that instruction?
He mentions an interesting shift. He says initially people might just sit still, but over time, sometimes people hear be with me and automatically close their eyes as if that's the required posture.
Ah, like imitating a meditative look.
Yeah, right. And he cautions against that. Genuine presence isn't about adopting a specific pose or imitating someone else's behavior. It's an internal state, a natural shift, not a copied action.
Which leads to a warning about imitation in general.
Emphasizing that their outward actions, sitting under a tree, dancing ecstatically, walking constantly, were expressions of their inner state, their realization. They weren't techniques to be copied by others to achieve the same state.
Copying the action doesn't grant the understanding.
Not at all. And he tells a pretty intense story to illustrate this danger. About Adi Shankar.
The philosopher Adi Shankar. What's the story?
Apparently, Adi Shankar once drank liquor offered to him, seemingly without ill effect. Some disciples trying to imitate him also drank it and obviously got drunk or sick.
Okay.
Then, to make the point even more forcefully, Adi Shankara supposedly drank molten iron, again, unharmed, challenging his disciples to do the same if they thought mere imitation was the key.
Wow, that's graphic. But it makes the point about the danger of superficial imitation quite powerfully.
Extremely powerfully. Don't copy the external form without the internal substance.
So this ties into his views on role models then, especially for kids.
It does. He seems a bit wary of the whole role model concept. He suggests it can lead people, particularly children, into this desperate effort to be someone else.
Instead of figuring out who they are.
Exactly. Losing touch with their own natural way of being, their own, inherent nature, because they're so busy trying to conform to an external image.
Does he connect this to people struggling with spiritual practice?
He does. He mentions hearing from older people who've studied spirituality for decades, read all the books, done the practices, but feel stuck.
While younger, maybe less knowledgeable people seem to have breakthroughs.
Right. And he attributes this feeling of being stuck, at least partly, to that same issue. Desperately trying to be something other than who you are. Trying to fit a mold, maybe the mold of a spiritual person or a specific teacher.
And that effort, that trying, gets in the way.
He argues it involves tremendous calculation. When you're imitating, you're constantly thinking, analyzing, comparing, adjusting. Am I doing it right? Am I like them?
Which is the opposite of just being.
Precisely. All that mental calculation prevents the simplicity of just being present and authentic.
So this calculation, is that the main obstacle he identifies?
It seems to be a huge one, which leads him to what feels like a central piece of advice. Dropping the calculation of what can I get?
What can I get? Out of what? Out of everything.
Out of experiences, particularly spiritual ones like satsang or meditation, but really potentially out of everything in life. This constant background processing of what's in it for me, what's the benefit, what's the takeaway.
In dropping that calculation, what does that achieve?
He makes a bold claim. Dropping just that one calculation can resolve maybe 90% of the work on the spiritual path.
90%. That's huge. How?
He uses a metaphor, the game of snakes and ladders. He says once that, what can I get? Calculation is gone. The snakes that pull you down just disappear from the board.
Because the motivation that creates the struggle is gone.
That seems to be the idea. If you're not constantly trying to gain something, you're less likely to encounter the pitfalls born from that striving, from attachment to outcomes.
Does he suggest applying this beyond just spiritual practice?
Oh, yeah. He says if you drop this calculation in all aspects of life, it leads towards boundlessness, towards compassion, because you're not relating to the world purely in terms of personal acquisition.
So that question, what can I get, is like the engine of the mind's activity.
He identifies it as the key to the mind's constant churning. It's always assessing, valuing, seeking advantage.
And if you lessen that,
then just being present, becomes much more natural. It's already there, he implies, but we miss it because our psychological activity driven by that calculation is so loud.
it sounds simple, but incredibly difficult to actually do. To stop calculating gain.
He acknowledges that. He says completely stopping it might be very hard, but even just lowering it, becoming aware of it, and consciously reducing it can make a big difference.
Does he mention things like love or compassion in this context? Are they states where that calculation is lower?
He touches on it briefly, suggests that perhaps in moments of love or compassion, that takeaway mentality might lessen, but he also quickly points out how often even relationships have transactional elements hidden within them.
True. There is often still an underlying expectation or calculation, even if subtle.
Right. So he ends this section by almost voicing the listener's likely thought.
Which is?
Basically, hang on, if I don't get anything out of this, what the hell am I doing here?
Huh. Yeah, that's the immediate reaction, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why engage if there's no payoff?
And he says, yep, that is the nature of the calculating mind. That question itself reveals the mechanism he's talking about.
Okay, so quite a journey there. From luck and predictions to karma, inaction, imitation, and finally, this core idea of dropping the what can I get mindset.
It covers a lot of ground, definitely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's try and crystallize the main takeaways from the speaker's perspective here.
Okay, first, definitely that questioning of simple labels like bad luck, understanding its subjective nature, the importance of perspective, and looking for deeper causes.
Right. And second, the limitation of relying only on external predictions or rigid beliefs, right? Valuing practical wisdom, observation, and taking action based on current reality.
Exactly. Then there's the broader definition of karma, not just me, myself, and I, but including our environment, the actions of others, and crucially, the consequences of inaction.
Uh-huh. And linked to that, the danger of using superficial explanations, like blaming everything on past karma as a way to avoid responsibility for what's happening now.
Definitely. Then the big shift towards the internal, the distinction he makes between intellectual understanding or psychological processing and genuine being, that presence beyond thought and emotion.
And the things that get in the way of that being like imitation, trying to be someone else.
And that pervasive, constant calculation, what's in it for me, how much that hinders our ability to just be authentic and present.
And finally, the potential power in consciously reducing that calculation, that focus on personal gain, as a path towards maybe boundlessness or compassion.
Yeah, that seems to be the ultimate suggestion offered in this part of the talk.
So lots to think about. And maybe a final thought for you listening. Where in your own life might you be defaulting to luck or karma as an explanation without maybe digging deeper?
And how might that constant, perhaps subconscious question, what can I get out of this, be shaping your experiences, your relationships, even your spiritual practice?
And just maybe, what would it feel like to approach one situation, just one, without needing a specific outcome or a personal benefit from it, just to engage for its own sake?
Yeah. Interesting questions to sit with. Thanks for joining us for this exploration.
Until the next deep dive.